Welcome back to everyone. I see that I'm looking at the participants list and there hasn't been a lot of change. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over the housekeeping items. This is our last technical session, technical session 3. So we are just going to jump into it. The first presenter is Jason Vogel. He's the professor of civil engineering and environmental science at the University of Oklahoma. He's going to be talking about the compost filter socks for stormwater and erosion controls in construction. So with that, please, Jason, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Can everybody see my slide screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Very good, very good.
Perfect.
So, yes, today we're going to talk about compost filter socks and a project that we started in January. So it's been going on for about 10 months now as part of SPR 2286 to look at compost filter socks for sediment control and erosion control at construction sites, specifically transportation construction sites. Thanks to our ODOT partners, Teresa, Stephen, Josh, Catherine, and Brian. They've all been great help. And we also have some partners from the community that are working with us, helping to provide compost and the socks. Fertile Ground is a nonprofit cooperative from Oklahoma City. And then the city of Midwest City has provided composts for us for our research. So we really, really appreciate them as well. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my grad students, Jessica Shepard and Christina Gilday, who are doing the heavy lifting on this research. So what are compost filter socks? They're basically a erosion control device that are filled with what's called compost overs. So it might not be what you specifically think about. This is actually using a waste product from compost where it's sieved and the compost goes through the bottom. That's what they sell. That's their black gold that they sell for as a soil amendment. And then this is mostly wood chips with a little bit of the organic that sticks to it. And those are often installed along the perimeter or along the flow path so that you can intercept that runoff and give the sediment a chance to settle out. But compost quality is very important. Testing methods for the examination of compost and composting, which is from the U.S. Compost Council, they have a standard for their compost that's in their compost filter socks, and that's greater than 99% passing a 3-inch sieve. So greater than 99% has to be smaller than 3 inches. And then less than 40% passing a 3/8 inch sieve. So you want the majority of that material to be between 3/8 of an inch and 3 inches. So as you can see, it's mostly mostly the wood chips that are coated with the organic, and that organic has benefit, but too much could potentially be a detriment to water quality. So when you're installing these, you're going to install them kind of similar to what you would a wattle or even a silt fence, and we're kind of thinking that this could potentially be utilized in place of a silt fence. So you're going to put these at least 5 foot beyond the toe of a slope, allow for runoff accumulation, allow that water to build up behind it, so that you can get your sediment to settle out, and then the water slowly goes through this compost filter sock and goes through there. If there's some organics that could, like pesticides and other things that could stick to that compost that's in there, but it also could leach out some nutrients, which is what our project is really about. There are some design guidelines from the NRCS for installing these. So depending on what your slope is, you're going to have spacing between your compost filter socks, and you're going to install these kind of like you would straw wattles. So you're putting them in with a stake and putting that along the contour and closer together, the more slope that you have. So they're going to be installed similar to that, but they can be thicker. And once again, they're created with a waste product. There's several developers that I know in Oklahoma who are really interested in this. actually kind of got into this business of looking at compost filter socks from being involved in stakeholder meetings for the construction general permit. And they wanted to add it to the permit. But several folks were asking about, well, will they leach nutrients because you're forcing water through something that has compost in it? And so that's kind of where this research came from. So we have 6 different objectives on our project. As I mentioned, we're less than halfway through the project, so I'm mostly going to talk about 3 parts of it. First off, developing a standard testing method for nutrient leaching from the compost filter socks. So we need to have a way to test these things that's repeatable, relatively easily repeatable. And then once we develop that, we'll do a factorial laboratory testing using 3 different types of soil and different levels of nutrients to look at the influence of soil type and how much is coming in on what comes out. And then finally, talk about the beginnings of some work that we're doing on field monitoring of compost filter sock performance on construction sites. In addition, we'll be looking at cost-benefit analysis. We've just barely begun that. I won't touch on that today. And then finally, developing design specifications based upon our results. NRCS does have some design specifications, but they are mostly based upon sediment removal. And so we want to update that, incorporating the nutrient leaching potential as well, because we don't want to solve one environmental problem and cause another one, especially in watersheds that are impaired by nutrients. So we're looking at these compost filter socks. This image here, you can see that this is 100 foot of compost filter sock on a pallet, and you just wind that out onto the landscape. But we're trying to look at, do they leach nutrients, and if they do, under what conditions? Defining leaching as there's more nutrients going out of it than is coming in. It's not necessarily the same molecules of the nutrients, but there's more going out of the sock than there is coming in, because we want to see if it has that potential for polluting our downstream water bodies. So our first objective I want to talk about is developing our standard apparatus. And so with that, we started out, there's actually a standard testing apparatus for silt fence that ASTM has. That's basically a wooden flume on an 8% slope. They used a set volume of water with a set mass of sediment, mix it up in there, and then let it all out of that relatively quickly, and then time the amount of time that it takes for that water to go through, and what the sediment concentration is as it comes out. So this is where we started, and we thought it was a pretty good place for us to start looking at if we were trying to develop a standard method for testing our compost filter socks. So with that, we developed what was our original apparatus, now sometimes called the large apparatus, because you'll see on the next slide, and if you watched my videos, you may have seen on the video, we're developing a smaller apparatus that's just a little bit easier to use, but hopefully that will have some of the same type of results. So we're adding our nutrients in the form of some salts into simulated rainwater along with sediment from a particular soil, often the B horizon, since that would be what's represented in a construction site, and then weighing our sock. You'll see here in a second that sock density I think is going to play a role in that, and putting that on our flume and then the water flows out, and we're sampling the water after it goes through the sock. So our smaller apparatus is basically just a sliver, a portion of that larger apparatus, but made with a PVC pipe that we put the compost filter sock in the end of that, and do it the same way, but it's much smaller, much easier to move around, and easier for someone to potentially work with for large scale. And it also requires much less sediment in a smaller portion of the sock. So very preliminarily, we've done some runs with both methods, and they're not necessarily giving the same results, but they are predictable, and we can correlate that. And as we get out to the field, we can look at the same soil and look and see what's coming in and what's going out and how is that related. And then we can relate our laboratory apparatus to our field apparatus, making sure that we're accounting for all of our appropriate similitude factors. And then we can create this laboratory apparatus that can represent something in the field. So that's how we're developing our apparatus, and we're doing testing on both sizes of the apparatus to look at nutrient leaching. And I'm just going to show you some very preliminary data off the large apparatus for a couple soils. This is some initial stuff that we did. This was actually off of a soil from on campus here, and we were really wondering, does the water quality coming in make a difference on what's coming out? And for this particular soil, with some initial socks that we were testing from Minic Materials, and they ended up being outside of the spec. This was actually completed right before we got the proposal funded as a student project, but it kind of demonstrates what we're talking about. If you have a high level of phosphorus and a higher level of sediment coming in, you're going to have less coming out than you had coming in. Down here in this lower left-hand corner in the red part, that's where you have more coming out than you did coming in, because you didn't have a lot of phosphorus coming in and you didn't have a lot of sediment coming in. The phosphorus is going to stick to the sediment if there's a lot of sediment on the incoming, as you would expect in a construction site. Depending on the stage of the construction site, there may or may not be a lot of sources of phosphorus. If there's some places where there has been stabilization going on, there's potentially high phosphorus backing on the sod, or they've added some fertilizer, there may be some sources of phosphorus. But this was for one soil with these particular socks that were, like I said, they were a little bit outside. They also had a relatively low sock weight or density that we'll see here on the next sock. Really made a difference. So here we looked at a different type of soil that was out from the Kessler research site that is part of OU, and the higher density socks actually leached more than the lower density socks, and it kind of decreased as you added more. Once again, if there's more coming in, there's more of a chance that it's going to be removed. The point of this is that the higher density, it has a higher percentage of organics in it. It's not as much of the wood chips, so there's more of that to come out. So this is very preliminary from where we're at, but we're already seeing that sock density and what's coming in is in the runoff is really going to make a difference on what comes out. So for certain situations, our goal is to develop those design criteria for a specific site, for a specific compost source, compost filter sock source. So we're running these matrix trials here with our nutrients and our soil on the A horizon, the B horizon, and these are generally just one run, which is kind of a worst case scenario because there's the most source for the organic inside of there. And then we are going to do some multiple event runs for some of our extremes where these Z's are, and so then we can see how does it decrease over time, because you're going to expect multiple storms to go through these in the field. So our compost source, and once again, a shout out, Midwest City has provided this just for the cost of the trucking for us. And they're filled by a nonprofit out of Oklahoma City, Fertile Grounds LLC, and they're pulling together the socks for us. Their compost is not certified. There is a compost certification process, but they are in the process of getting their compost certified through the U.S. Composting Council, which is the group that does this type of thing. So that's the compost that we're using for our laboratory studies. Like I said, we have a video of both scales, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have on that. And so just within the last 3 or 4 weeks, and this was delayed a little bit because of COVID, we've been installing a field site at the I-235, I-44 interchange where that construction site is in Oklahoma City. And basically we want to look at the water that's coming into the sock and going out of the sock, and we're going to quantify that with flow and concentration so that we can get a mass in and mass out using auto samplers in the field. Here's our construction, simulated construction site. There are some gullies in there. We just left them in there. And then we are replacing that with our compost filter sock and our apparatus. We went and did some surveying. And so here's our drainage basin, comes down, and we have our compost filter sock. We are putting a tarp down here because we need to get it narrow. We need to have it wide when it goes through the sock, but then to actually measure it through a flume, we need to get it narrow. So we don't want to lose any water to the subsurface soil. So we have this, it's actually a reused billboard that we bought from California that flows down here and through our flume so that we can measure our flow, and we're triggered on flow and rainfall on our samples. And here's a couple pictures during our installation as we're working through there with my grad students and several of our workers with this this flume that we have there on the end, and that's all set up, ready to go. Christina was just out there yesterday hooking up the auto sampler, so now we just need it to rain. So in summary, we're working on our compost filter socks, looking at trying to develop some design criteria so that they can be utilized in a repeatable way that's not going to solve one problem, but potentially create another problem. We're doing this by creating some laboratory scale standard testing methods and actually have already been in some preliminary talks with the International Erosion Control Association about developing some standard methods that would work through them. And we're finding density, influent sediment, and influent nitrogen and phosphorus are all probably going to be important in deciding where these things are appropriate. But the really cool thing is you don't have the repeated maintenance that you're going to have on something like a silt fence, but they could be utilized in about the same type of a manner. They come 8, 12, or 18 inches thick. So you're going to have a lot less maintenance along the way. You're not going to have the silt fence flapping in the wind. And at the end, you can just cut them open and leave them there on the ground because they're all organic and they create these little berms. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. So I guess maybe that's a little bit later.
Right, Jason. Thank you again. Thank you for that very informative presentation. Appreciate that. We are going to hold on to the questions here. Our final presentation, technical presentation for the day is Dennis Martin. He's the professor and turfgrass extension research specialist at the Oklahoma State University. He's going to be talking about the effects of mowing timing and frequency on green antelopehorn milkweeds in Oklahoma highways right-of-way. So with that, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, how's my volume?
I can hear you loud and clear, so that's all good.
Very good. I'm going to adjust my screen here, move the little boxes over. Thank you. Pleased to have the chance to visit with you today about some roadside vegetation management projects that involved mowing timing and frequency testing. Before I get too far into the presentation, I want to acknowledge the state planning and research funding that was provided from ODOT and also Federal Highway Administration, as well as to the many, many people that assisted with this in one form or another. I don't have time to mention everyone, but do want to show the names and appreciation, deep appreciation here. If you've had the chance to travel the corridor between Stillwater and I-35, you probably saw these joint project research and training signs on monarch habitat plots. Even right now, the logos of ODOT and OSU have both changed, so the logos are obsolete, but the signs are still in place. And there's also some of these in place for some habitat plots that are on I-35 from the Stillwater exit on up towards Deer Ridge Road just south of Perry. So if you see those, you'll understand now what was involved with them. This work was conducted under Joint projects 2157, Roadside Vegetation Management Research, and also Project 2156, Roadside Vegetation Management Training and Consultation, as well as some funding that was from Oklahoma State University's Horticulture and Landscape Architecture Department, as well as the Integrative Biology Department. Purpose of the work was to conduct not only research, but also training and implementation. The research was to generate knowledge that contributes to an ever-growing body of knowledge and strategy for management of non-clear zone, that's area outside the clear safety zone right of way, and also to integrate the new knowledge into the existing body of knowledge, and to promote a functional and affordable managed vegetation community consistent with soil stabilization, safety and beautification goals, and that also promote monarch, pollinator, and invertebrate habitat. And even though monarchs aren't listed in the title today, this is the creature shown in the center that benefits from milkweed being present in right-of-way. That's the monarch butterfly. It's a much appreciated species. It's iconic. This happens to be a male because you can see the dot on the lower back wing. Females will not have that dot, so immediately you can tell whether you're looking at a male or a female mature monarch. And it's on a Liatris plant, a prime nectarine plant, furnishes nutritional nectar. And you'll hear me talking about nectarine plants today as well, because that's very important to be able to feed the adults as well as to be able to raise the larvae. Monarch butterflies are unique in that they require milkweed species to lay their eggs on and for the larvae to feed upon. There are cardiac glucosides, which are essentially heart poisons that are present in milkweed sap, and that benefits the larvae against predators that might feed upon them. Now, on the news, you may have learned that monarch populations have been in decline for a number of years. This graph shows wintering populations in Mexico, at least over the last years from 1994 through 2019. The World Wildlife Federation and other scientists suggest that there needs to be about 6 hectares of wintering monarch area in Mexico in order for it to be a sustainable population. There is a population that winters in South Florida, also Southern California, but our talk here concerns with the population that winters in Mexico. And I've heard conflicting results about this past winter, the December 19, January 2020. But anyway, the population is somewhat unstable. It's believed to be that way due to loss of habitat over the decades with urbanization and also changes in agricultural practices. Now, in order to understand the research that I'm going to share with you, you have to understand a little bit about the life cycle of the monarch. Here are 2 eggs laid on a green antelopehorn milkweed leaf that was selected from an Oklahoma roadside. Those will hatch in 3 to 5 days, and they'll produce first instar larvae. There's a total of 5 larval end stages between the egg and the pupa, which will go to the adult phase. But anyway, this is first instar, and their first act is usually to eat the egg casing. They're very small at this point. Okay, eventually they'll go through 5 instar phases and arrive at this stage, and they can eat a tremendous amount of milkweed forage at this size. And then eventually they will go into pupation here, and this stage lasts about 10 to 14 days before the chrysalis turns clear, and then they eclose, which is emergence, and the adult butterfly comes out. It takes a few hours for them to pump up their wings and then go off to a nectarine source. This again is a male monarch butterfly. But that whole process from the point of egg laying to emergence from the chrysalis as an adult takes from about 30 to 34 days, and a lot can happen to habitat during that time period. There's all manner of predators, diseases, insects that eat on these things, or else they would actually eat all of their habitat species of milkweed. So only about 2% of the eggs laid ever make it to a mature phase like this, if you want to figure on that. So that's a tremendous amount of mortality. Well, Oklahoma lies in the primary flight zone for the central population, as you can see there, Oklahoma and Texas. So it's a very important passageway for egg laying and also nectaring. There are 5 generations of the monarch throughout the year, 4 for certain, and a 5th that can come about if there's fall breeding in Oklahoma and Texas. So, and that's very important in Oklahoma roadside. So it's very important to have milkweed habitat there and also nectarine habitat in Oklahoma roadsides for all the other generations. So they're going to arrive from Texas. Generally in the month of April, out of Mexico, fly through Texas and Oklahoma, arrive in April, and they're going to lay eggs. That first generation will form on milkweed in the April-May timeframe. Takes about 30 days for the eggs to go to maturity, and then if the habitat is appropriate here in Oklahoma, and if it rains and there's good soil moisture and plenty of milkweed, a portion of the population will stay here throughout the summer and continue to breed and lay eggs and generate and then fly south in the fall, that 4th generation. If conditions are unsuitable here, almost everything that hatches in the Texas-Oklahoma area will fly to northern states, even up into southern Canada for appropriate nectarine habitat and milkweed habitat. But we do play a vital role, and that's why Oklahoma roadsides are an important area for good land stewardship in order to preserve and actually try to grow the monarch population. Now, I'm going to try to integrate both research findings with also happenings in ODOT programs. In 2016, ODOT staff began a program aimed at reducing mowing of areas outside of the clear safety zone, except where absolutely necessary. And that reduced mowing came about with reduced mowing frequency. Not until July was the first mowing to be conducted in most of the rural areas in order to reduce mowing maintenance costs, and also as secondary to protect milkweed and nectarine plants for the benefit of monarch butterflies and other pollinators. Also at that time, ODOT Chief Engineer Mr. Casey Shell, along with leaders of 6 other state departments of transportation, signed a memorandum of understanding unofficially naming I-35 the Monarch Highway. And it's symbolic because monarchs don't necessarily follow I-35. It's quite a broad band that they follow in their migration from the northern states down to south central Mexico. But it is a meaningful symbolism of habitat preservation and actions of good land stewardship for trying to still meet the needs of the motoring public in terms of safety and sight visibility, but also think about the area that's outside the clear safety zone and see if we can't do something more for pollinators and other invertebrates. And also I want to keep pointing out that this program does not affect the clear safety zone, which is approximately the first 15 to 30 feet between the edge of the pavement and maybe 5 foot above the bottom of the concrete ditch liner. So it doesn't affect that part of the area of vegetation. That can be mowed and treated with herbicides as necessary to provide nice sight distance. This is for the area outside the clear safety zone. If you look at the 1993 ODOT mowing manual, in the parallel hatching here, you can see areas that at that time were subject to the wildflower program and also for invertebrate and bird habitat. And so this is kind of back to the future. This was already specified in mowing manuals of the past, and if you look in cross section here, you can see our clear zone here, and then also an area, if you need greater sight distance, like on a curve or a hill, you can mow this, but if you don't need that area sight distance, you can let it go until mid-July and allow for nectarine plants to thrive and also for the generations in the spring of monarch to complete their life cycle, and also, of course, for beautification in the deeper areas of the right-of-way. So this is kind of back to the future. We're just re-emphasizing things. Here you can see from the edge of the pavement out to the concrete ditch liner, an area that would be under relatively high maintenance, but from essentially the ditch liner on up the bank, we have a lot of flexibility, and there's several 100,000 acres out there that can be dealt with reduced maintenance programs. It's an opportunity to save money. We do still need to control invasive plants like Johnson grass out there, but we do have a lot of flexibility in that area out there because it doesn't directly affect sight distance. So this program was aimed at investigating right-of-way mowing timing frequency events on milkweed presence in non-clear zone areas, and also An implementation phase under Project 2156 was to provide training and consultation to ODOT field managers to integrate the knowledge so that they could make sound decisions. We did not make demands on the programs being in place, but merely were there for consultation and to provide technical support. The mowing regimes that we tested in research were no mowing at all, and I can tell you we dismiss that because we do get brush invasion, as you might guess. So the more practical programs involved programs 2 through 6. Mowed 4 times per year, which is considered a traditional mowing, and that's done prior to Memorial Day, prior to 4th of July, prior to Labor Day, and then an end of season, growing season mowing. And then we had a program mowed only in mid-July, then one mowed only in mid-July, and then late fall as a cleanup, then only the late fall cleanup, and then a final one introduced in 2018 at the request of the state maintenance engineer at that time, was to take a look at adding a mid-June mowing and the late fall mowing as an additional treatment. We had 21 research plots. They were located over a course of 21 miles from our home base at the Orange Star at the Turfgrass Center on up I-35 to Deer Ridge Road. So the round trip for us would be about 42 miles in trying to spend your SPNR dollars wisely. And so there were 21 total plots involved with the research between the blue arrows. We used mowing pieces of equipment that would simulate what ODOT was using. We did use a 5-inch cutting height because when we measured, that was actually the implementation cutting height being used many times on roadsides. You'll see things mentioned from 6 inches on up in the mowing manual. I utilized an 8-foot wide brush hog on a 100 horsepower tractor for your larger plots, and then where turning radius was problematic or steep slopes that weren't supportive of a larger mower, I used a small 34-inch walk behind mower. And we did mark all plots with the Habitat Cooperative Research Project signs. They're still in place. Now this shows an area that had received an earlier season mowing, and then we were coming back to implement the pre-4th of July mowing. We did scout the milkweeds present, count their numbers. Even though research plots were different sized, we normalized those to standardized unit areas in order to account for unequal plot sizes. And we also did rescue eggs and larvae that were present, and those were raised to adulthood, and we do have a video on how to raise those if you'd like to see them in the demonstration videos. Here's an example of an egg on a flower bud actually. They're very, very small, so we did scout very carefully. There's eggs on various leaves that were rescued, and those were taken in for raising. And so mowing, if improperly timed, can have catastrophic results on eggs and larvae of monarch. And also it can reduce nectarine plants. So a summary of our findings here, rather than share a bunch of individual data with you. Findings are highly variable depending upon weather conditions each year. During a drought, both milkweed abundance and nectarine plant abundance are drastically and negatively affected. It sounds like a Ken Burns movie on the Dust Bowl, right? If it rains. During a drought and with greatly reduced milkweed numbers and monarch eggs and larvae found in Oklahoma roadsides throughout the growing season, they are greatly reduced if the habitat is greatly reduced. Poor time to mowing during peak egg laying in April or May would result in mowing down of milkweed plants and destruction of eggs and larvae. And also mowing in July only or in July and also at the end of the growing season does help regenerate milkweed plants if soil moisture is present. But the downside is that it reduces nectarine plants in late summer, and that can be problematic also. And then when soil moisture is adequate in high quality habitat with milkweeds and nectarine plants, not mowing during the period April through October does allow for normal milkweed availability in spring, but it reduces milkweed availability because they go to maturity, set seed, and then die back to their root system in late summer. And so they're not there for egg laying later in the summer. But if you don't mow between April and October, you increase the nectarine habitat present for later in the summer. So we see there's some conflicting information that comes out. For those that would like to watch the video in more detail, I offer these graphs and data, but I wanted to summarize the major findings. And then how did we implement this? We trained over 900 ODOT field staff in over 45 continuing education units over a 3-year period regarding the findings of the work and how to integrate it. We also taught them about Oklahoma's Managed Pollinator Plan that was put out by the Department of Agriculture in 2016. Also, we integrated portions of the rangeland habitat monarch butterfly program from Okies for Monarchs organization. And then Von Seal Harmon has alerted me to the fact that the monarch butterfly BMP's manual will be out soon for rights of way, and that is nearing very, very close to being released. So again, this program doesn't affect the clear safety zone. It's for areas outside that. And things that need to be done for the area outside the clear safety zone in order to integrate the findings. Well, whether you mow or not, you need to control Johnson grass outside clear safety zone because it just further degrades habitat. It degrades habitat across the fence line and within ODOT's managed area of management. Also, it looks like there needs to be 2 management regimes for improving monarch and pollinator habitat. One would mow certain areas of milkweed to allow them to regrow to be present for further generation raising during the summer. But also if you do that, you cut down on nectaring resources. So you need other areas that aren't mowed at all. And there the milkweeds would emerge in the spring, they'd be utilized, they die back to the roots. There's not many of them present later in the season. But by not mowing, you would have nectaring habitat present for the remainder of the year, the growing season, for any monarchs that are present and also that pass through from the northern states on their way south. And then finally, we know that field managers care very much about their stewardship of land. They want to cut down on winter wildfire fuel, but also the later we can push that late season mowing of area outside the clear safety zone, the more you preserve that nectaring habitat for monarchs that are migrating from the northern states through Oklahoma. So we ask people to not get in a hurry to mow down those areas outside the clear safety zone at the end of the growing season. If that can be delayed until at least October 15th, preferably later, it will greatly improve things. And then the wiper technology that many of the divisions are already using, that can be used to wipe glyphosate on areas outside clear safety zone to kill Johnson grass and leave shorter plants in place. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to present and integrate the information. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to address those. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks for the funding to be able to conduct the work.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jason. Great presentation, a lot of great resources and the reference that you made. I guess we have a couple of minutes for question and answers. Teresa, let me start off with you. Do you have any on your side, any questions?
Yes, I do. I have one that says, I've heard that tropical milkweed grown from seeds provides monarchs lots of protection as they make their migration. And then, should we not plant tropical milkweeds, or should we cut it back early? As long as it dies out over the winter and kills all of the protozoan parasites, isn't any type of milkweed acceptable? What is the official word on non-native milkweed species here in Oklahoma?
The official word is that we would really appreciate if everyone would try to more utilize the native types. Common milkweed is very preferred, but it's native to the northeastern part of the state. We do have honeyvine milkweed that can be utilized, but they prefer it, it seems, in late summer. But green Antelopehorn milkweed is preferred season long, and it's very easy to grow, and it's very drought tolerant, and that's why it's found statewide in Oklahoma. We encourage people to kind of cut back on the use of tropical milkweed. We know it's a pretty flower, it's easy to grow. Monarchs love it because it's their principal feeding source when they are in Mexico. But also, as is mentioned, it can carry protozoan parasites. It is better if you start your tropical milkweed from seed each year. That way you reduce the probability of carryover parasites. I hope that I answered all those questions.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Teresa. I have a quick question for Jason. What is the, I guess, the mechanistic explanation for the differences in results for small scale and large scale testing?
That's a good question, and as I mentioned on the slide, that's very preliminary work, but we've actually been working this week looking at that because we just got all those results a couple weeks ago. And as we dug into it, the small scale one, which should have about the same drain time as the large scale one, it ends up that had about half the drain time. So with compost filter socks or any of these type of erosion control, you want to have a connection to the soil. And on the large scale one with the wood bottom, and we put just a flat empty mesh sock on the bottom to try to connect it. I think we got good connection to the bottom there, and we didn't get a lot of preferential flow. My suspicion, and we're actually ran the first run of this yesterday to test this, is that with the smooth round pipe, we didn't get as a good connection at the bottom, and we may be getting some preferential flow out of the bottom. The results were pretty consistent, they just weren't the same. So we're working on putting some roughed up lip around at least the bottom part of it so that we can get a better connection to the bottom and we're not getting preferential flow through that. But that's a good question.
Appreciate that. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jason. Very informative presentations. I want to thank all the presenters, and let's give them a big hand of applause virtually. Thank you again.